when you become something in it, it just opens doors to anything that interests you.
She ran down a beach in 1979 and became one of the most recognizable women in the world overnight. And then, just as quickly, she disappeared. So today, let's talk about it. Remember Bo Derek? This is why she's no longer acting. A California girl. Mary Kathleen Collins was born on November 20th, 1956, in Long Beach, California. Her father, Paul Collins, was an executive at Hobie Cat, the well-known catamaran manufacturing company. Her mother, Norma, was a makeup artist and hairdresser, and her most notable client happened to be the actress Anne Margaret. That connection to the edges of Hollywood glamour would turn out to matter more than anyone could have expected. Growing up in the South Bay area of Los Angeles, Mary Kathleen was a restless teenager. She attended Narbonne High School in Harbor City, California, but school never quite held her the way the ocean did. She has talked about skipping classes to hitchhike to the beach, always drawn more to the California sunshine than to anything a classroom could offer. In a 1985 appearance on Late Night with David Letterman, she described it with a laugh. She went a month without going to school, got caught, started going back, was actually starting to enjoy it again. And then a film came along and pulled her out of it entirely. She was 16 years old, and the man behind that film would define the next quarter century of her life. The man who changed everything. In 1972, Mary Kathleen auditioned for the female lead in a film being put together by a director named John Derek. He was planning a romantic drama to be shot in Greece, a project that would not surface publicly for years, eventually released under the title Fantasies. John Derek was 46 at the time. He had been a working Hollywood actor through the 1950s and into the 1960s, appearing in All the King's Men, Rogues of Sherwood Forest, The Ten Commandments, and Exodus. By the early 1970s, he had moved away from acting and toward directing and photography. He was also married to actress Linda Evans, who would later become famous to millions as Crystal Carrington on the television series Dynasty. Mary Kathleen got the part. She traveled to Greece for the shoot, and somewhere during production, she and John Derek fell in love. The situation was enormously complicated. He was 30 years older than her. He was married. She was 16. When Linda Evans filed for divorce in 1974, John took Mary Kathleen to Germany, where California's statutory rape laws could not reach him. They stayed in Europe until she turned 18, then returned to the United States and married on June 10, 1976. She was 19. He was 49. Bo has spoken about this chapter with real candor. In a 2016 interview with Interview magazine, she said, "I feel terrible about it. John was married to Linda at the time, whom I worshipped and adored, and who was so kind to me. And then, when all this happened, I was at least halfway responsible for some serious pain she went through." From the marriage came a new identity. She combined her former stage name, Bo Shane, with her married name and became Bo Derek. The transformation went deeper than a name. John bleached her hair blonde and took a close, deliberate interest in every aspect of her appearance. He had been photographing beautiful women for years, and he had a precise aesthetic in mind. He was building towards something specific, and the world would understand what that was within 3 years. Orca and the Quiet Years. Before the film that made Bo Derek a household name, there was a brief and modest warm-up. In 1977, director Michael Anderson cast her in a supporting role in Orca, the Killer Whale, a film that made no secret of the fact that it owed its existence to the success of Jaws 2 years earlier. Bo played a character who meets a grim end early in the story, courtesy of the film's title animal. Orca was not a serious vehicle for anyone involved, and it did not generate any real attention for Bo personally. But it was her first released film under her married name, and it put her in front of movie-going audiences in a small way. What those quiet years between Orca and her breakthrough were actually full of was John Derek's preparation. He was photographing her extensively, developing the specific visual language that would define how the world first saw her. He was a skilled photographer with a precise aesthetic sensibility, one he had been developing across multiple subjects and marriages for years, and he was applying all of it to Bo. She has spoken about this period as one of real creative collaboration, of learning how to exist in front of a lens, of understanding how her face and her movement looked from the other side of the camera. Whether one views that process as mentorship or manipulation likely depends on where one sits, but the result of it was undeniable. By the time Blake Edwards began searching for the right woman to anchor his new film, Bo Derek had been prepared for years for exactly the kind of attention that role was about to bring her.
We have 10 horses and 6 dogs and 4 cats, and it's beautiful.
The film that made her famous. In 1979, Blake Edwards was casting a romantic comedy he was calling 10. Edwards had a career that included Breakfast at Tiffany's, Days of Wine and Roses, and the Pink Panther films. He was not a director who needed to prove himself. The film starred Dudley Moore as a middle-aged composer going through a crisis, a man who becomes fixated on a beautiful woman he sees for a moment and cannot get out of his mind. For the premise to work, that woman had to be genuinely extraordinary. Bo was chosen for the role of Jenny after a process that included Melanie Griffith, Heather Thomas, and Tanya Roberts, among those seriously considered. The film opened in October 1979, and it landed with the force of a genuine cultural event. The sequence people still remember: Bo running toward Dudley Moore along a Malibu beach in a fitted nude-colored swimsuit, her hair in tight cornrows, slow motion and sunlit, hit the public consciousness with a force that very few images in cinema history have managed. It was on the covers of major magazines within weeks. It was parodied on television almost immediately. People who went to the movies that autumn came out talking about one thing: the film itself was critically well received and commercially very successful. Bo received a Golden Globe nomination for New Star of the Year. Actress, she lost to Bette Midler for The Rose, but the nomination confirmed that the industry was paying close attention. She was 22 years old, and she was the most talked about woman in America. The cornrow hairstyle carried a cultural dimension that didn't receive much attention in 1979, but has been discussed many times since. The style had deep roots in African American culture and tradition. Bo wearing it in that film brought it suddenly into mainstream white pop culture conversation in ways that generated both admiration and real criticism, and that conversation has surfaced repeatedly in the decades since. The price of overnight fame. What followed 10 is a story that many people who lived through that era know in outline, though not always in its full shape. After the film came out, Bo was everywhere at once. The covers, the television appearances, the kind of sudden fame that leaves no time for a person to think about what to do with it. She has said herself that she arrived at that moment completely unprepared. No agent, no publicist, no lawyer, no one managing the machinery around her. She was, in her own word, blindsided. And into that open space stepped John Derek, now positioned as not just her husband, but the architect of her entire professional life. He had always been involved, but after 10, John took the director's chair for every project that followed, and the results were painful to watch. The first film after 10 was A Change of Seasons in 1980, directed by Richard Lang, with Shirley MacLaine and Anthony Hopkins also in the cast. Bo played a college student having an affair with her older married professor. The film performed modestly at the box office, but critics were not impressed. MacLaine and Hopkins were the only performances reviewers were willing to take seriously. Bo's notices were dismissive. Then came the John Derek productions in sequence. Tarzan, the Ape Man arrived in 1981, with Bo as Jane Parker, and the story's entire weight redistributed away from Tarzan and onto her. The film was built around her appearance in revealing jungle costumes and nude scenes, and critics said so without much diplomacy. Despite the reviews, the film made money, over $35 million at the box office, good enough to rank among the 15 top-grossing films of that year. But Bo shared the very first Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Actress with Faye Dunaway, who had her own troubled film that year. The Razzies, newly created, had found an early reliable target. Bolero came in 1984. John Derek wrote it, directed it, and photographed it. The story followed a young woman traveling the world after graduation in search of a perfect lover. The sexual content was explicit enough to earn the film an X rating, which shut it out of mainstream theaters. Bolero was panned comprehensively and became the kind of film people mentioned when they wanted an example of Hollywood indulgence at its worst. At that year's Razzies, it collected Worst Picture, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, Worst New Star, and Worst Actress, Bo's second such award in 3 years. Ghost Can't Do It arrived in 1989, 5 years later. John Derek again in the director's chair. Bo played a woman whose husband dies and returns as a ghost to help her find a younger replacement. The film is perhaps best remembered today for a cameo by Donald Trump, a part, Bo has confirmed, that was written specifically for him. Ghosts Can't Do It failed commercially and critically. At the Razzies, it swept Worst Picture, Worst Director, Worst Supporting Actor for Trump, and Worst Actress for Bo, her third.
It's very strange when you lose your privacy. I didn't know I was that private.
What went wrong on screen? Looking back across those years, a pattern becomes difficult to ignore. Every John Derek production was built primarily around Bo's physical appearance. The narratives were thin. The characters were thin. The critical community noticed and said so every single time, with increasing impatience. What those films consistently failed to provide was material that might have shown whether Bo Derek had more to offer than she was being asked to demonstrate. The box office complicated the picture. People went to see her. Tarzan made real money. The fascination that ignited didn't vanish overnight. But each new film that arrived to poor reviews spent down a little more of the goodwill that had been created, without anything being put back in its place. Bo has spoken about those years in interviews without rancor. She has said that she made those films willingly, and that she and John were genuine creative partners. She has never described herself as a victim of his decisions, but she has also acknowledged that working almost exclusively with one director, her husband, placed her in a professional lane from which it became steadily harder to exit. Hollywood decided early what Bo Derek was, and held firmly to that conclusion. Once an industry makes that kind of decision, the scripts that arrive tend to confirm it, rather than challenge it. There is also the question of what might have been different. Blake Edwards had seen something in Bo when he cast her in 10, something beyond just a striking face. The film gave her a character with genuine warmth and humor, and audiences responded to more than just the image. But the projects that followed never tested whether that response could carry into other kinds of stories. Instead, each successive John Derek film doubled down on the same elements that had generated controversy from the start. What was interesting about her screen presence often went unexamined, because the films surrounding that presence rarely invited serious discussion. The opening that 10 had created in 1979 was real. What the years that followed never quite managed to do was build on it in any direction worth talking about. After Ghosts Can't Do It, Bo's screen appearances became less frequent and considerably lower in profile. She appeared in the television film Hot Chocolate in 1992 and Shattered Image in 1994. That same year brought Woman of Desire, a straight-to-video thriller. These were not the projects of someone operating from a position of strength. Tommy Boy in 1995 was different. The Chris Farley and David Spade comedy was a genuine mainstream theatrical hit, and Bo played a scheming stepmother with some relish. The film was warmly received by audiences. She received a Razzie nomination for Worst Supporting Actress that year, but didn't win. Whatever else one says about it, Tommy Boy had a real release and real audiences, and it put her in front of a new generation of moviegoers who had grown up after 1979. Through the late 1990s came a string of smaller television appearances. 4 guest episodes on Wind on Water in 1998, a spot on The Drew Carey Show in 1999. Quieter work, quieter years. And then, in May 1998, John Derek died.
Does he ever get on your nerves?
No. No, we're only together because we want to be together.
The end of an era. John passed away on May 22nd, 1998. From cardiovascular disease at their home in Santa Maria, California. He was 71 years old. Their marriage had lasted 22 years. From the moment she traveled to Greece at 16, John had been the central figure in Bo's life. Her husband, her director, her photographer, the man who had shaped her image and guided almost every professional decision she made. Whatever the circumstances of how it began, and whatever one makes of the films they created together, the bond was long and genuine and deep. After his death, Bo has described having no desire to begin again romantically. She had her horses, her Santa Ynez property, her causes, and the private life she had been carefully building for years. She did not set out looking for anything else. She was content, she has said, to keep the life she had. Then a phone call changed the situation. A new chapter. In 2002, talent agent Norby Walters needed a companion for his Oscars party and thought of Bo. He arranged for her to attend with one of his clients, an actor named John Corbett, well known at the time for Northern Exposure, and more recently for playing Aiden on Sex and the City. Bo told him she hadn't dated anyone in 5 years. Corbett was 5 years her junior. Neither of them had any particular expectations for the evening. They connected immediately and have been together ever since. Bo described it to USA Today years later. "He makes me laugh all the time. He's full of life, full of joy. I became attracted to him, and I still am." For nearly 2 decades, they were a couple without being officially married. Private, contented, unbothered by what anyone else thought about the arrangement. In a 2015 interview with Entertainment Tonight, Bo explained the situation plainly. "We don't have children, and we're not young, so there isn't that pressure or need to get married. The pandemic changed things. In December 2020, in a small ceremony with only close friends and family present, Bo Derek and John Corbett got married. John announced it publicly the following August on The Talk, telling his friend Jerry O'Connell, "We didn't want 2020 to be that thing everybody looks back at and hated. We thought, well, let's get one nice thing out of it." They live now on a ranch in Santa Barbara, California, with horses and German shepherds and a daily rhythm that sounds nothing like a Hollywood life. A life built around horses. Long before acting faded from her life in any meaningful way, Bo Derek had been building something else entirely. A sustained commitment to causes that the entertainment press rarely covers. She published her autobiography in 2002, giving it the title, Riding Lessons. Everything that matters in life, I learned from horses. At various points, she had more than 30 horses on her Santa Ynez ranch. Andalusians, Lusitanos, thoroughbreds, and the specificity with which she speaks about breeds and care and behavior is not the language of celebrity endorsement. It is the language of someone who has spent decades in barns. Her most significant long-term public effort was the campaign to end the slaughter of American horses for meat export to Europe. She became a spokesperson for the Animal Welfare Institute and spent years lobbying Congress, walking the hallways of Senate office buildings, meeting with legislators individually, and making her case one vote at a time. A 2006 Washington Post piece followed her through a day of those meetings. Her approach was direct. "I am not a member of any animal rights organization. I am a big red meat eater. I live in cattle country. I rope. I brand. But as Americans, we don't eat our horses." In 2008, California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed her commissioner and vice chair of the California Horse Racing Board, a position she held until 2015. She used those 7 years to push for improved safety and welfare conditions for horses and jockeys within the thoroughbred industry from the inside. After leaving that board, she joined the board of directors of the Del Mar Thoroughbred Club. She was named Special Envoy of the Secretary of State for Wildlife Trafficking, working with the Coalition Against Wildlife Trafficking, a multinational effort fighting what she described as a $10 billion illegal black market in endangered species. She served as a trustee of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, appointed by President George W. Bush in 2002. She became a board member of WildAid. The Special Forces Association named her an honorary Green Beret for her work with disabled veterans. In 2018, the Helen Woodward Animal Center honored her with its annual Animal Welfare Award. The center's CEO, Mike Arms, put it simply, Bo Derek decided she wanted to make a difference in this world. She also developed Bo Derek Pet Care, her own line of dog grooming products, spending 3 years on testing and formulation before bringing anything to market.
Just because everyone else wants it, you don't have to.
Why she's no longer acting. There is no single moment when Bo Derek stopped being an actress. The withdrawal was gradual, shaped by several forces that reinforced each other over time. The practical reality was that the roles on offer after the John Derek era were not the roles she was interested in. She has said in interviews that she was not willing to take anything that came along simply to maintain a visible career. The scripts that arrived were shaped by Hollywood's fixed idea of what Bo Derek was, and that idea, formed in 1979, and cemented by the films that followed, left little room for anything else. Beyond the practical, the life she had built outside of acting turned out to be more satisfying. The years she spent in Congress, on boards, traveling for wildlife causes, those were years of work that felt genuinely purposeful. She has never described any of it as a substitute for something she lost. The advocacy, the horses, the causes, those were where her real energy went, and she found the right life. The ranch, the horses in the morning, John Corbett making her laugh in the evenings, a daily routine she has described with actual affection. coffee, feeding the horses, working in the garden, swimming, watching Jeopardy. For someone who arrived at fame completely unprepared and was never entirely comfortable with what it demanded, stepping back from it over time was not a loss. She has continued to appear occasionally. The Sharknado 3 cameo in 2015 was a cheerful, self-aware nod to her own mythology. She has participated in documentary work. The door is not locked from the inside, but the sustained film career that 10 seemed to be opening did not materialize into what anyone expected, and that has more than one explanation. The films she made, the narrowness of how the industry saw her, the choices she made freely in favor of things that mattered more to her. All of those things are true at the same time. Where she is now. Bo Derek turned 68 in November 2024. She and John Corbett continue to live on their Santa Barbara ranch, a life built around horses, dogs, the garden, and evenings watching films together. She remains involved with Wild Aid and continues to give her time to the veteran and animal welfare causes she has championed for the better part of 3 decades. She once described a typical day to Variety magazine. Wake up, make coffee, feed the horses, feed the dogs, feed herself, work at the computer, spend time in the garden, swim for exercise, feed the horses again in the evening, watch Jeopardy with John while eating dinner, then watch movies for the rest of the night. It is a life built entirely around what she values, at a pace she controls, without anyone else setting the terms. The woman who said she arrived at fame completely blindsided, without an agent, a publicist, a lawyer, or any preparation for what celebrity actually meant, has ended up in a life that looks entirely like her own design. Quiet, purposeful, far from the spotlight she never quite asked for. That image from 1979 made Bo Derek one of the most talked about women in America. It was everywhere almost immediately, and it stayed everywhere for years. Parodied, imitated, referenced, debated. For many people who were watching movies in that era, it remains the first thing that comes to mind when her name is mentioned. But the full story behind that image is longer and more layered than a single scene on a beach. A childhood in Southern California, a teenage girl cast in a film in Greece, and drawn into a relationship with a man 30 years her senior that took her to Germany, changed her name, changed her appearance, and set the course of the next 2 decades. Films that made her famous, and films that made critics reach for their sharpest adjectives. A 22-year marriage, a second life spent fighting for horses in Senate hallways, and endangered species at international conservation organizations. A quiet wedding in December 2020. A ranch in Santa Barbara with horses and dogs, and a man who makes her laugh every single day. That is the life behind the image. And it turned out to be quite a life. If this video brought back some memories, or gave you a fuller picture of someone you thought you already knew, we are glad you watched it. Bo Derek was more than the image that made her famous, and her story is worth knowing in its full shape. If you enjoyed it, give the video a like. It genuinely helps the channel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good time, because there are plenty more stories like this one coming. We'll see you in the next one.